Well, welcome again this week to an analysis behind the news. I'm going to make a lot of you mad at me. In fact, I'll bet you that, I'd guarantee that some of you will start swearing at me and probably turn this video off. But I don't want you to do that. I want you to look at what I have to say because I'm getting a little bit tired of the hypocrisy in the presidential campaign. And I'm going to be getting into also the North American Union. And all this controversy in the last week or so has been over the wives of the two leading contenders for the Republican nomination. That it's okay if you attack one candidate's wife, but it's not okay if you attack the other candidate's wife. So, I find these things a bit hypocritical, particularly because I find that the information is not getting out into the public relative to the North American Union aspects of Heidi Cruz. Heidi Cruz, and this is, by the way, the Council on Foreign Relations, I don't want to call it Bible, but it is the outline of the proposal for the North American Union. And they called it Building a North American Community. And it's issued by the Council on Foreign Relations. And at the beginning of this, it specifically shows who the members are of the task force put together by the Council on Foreign Relations that put this report together. The recommendations for a North American Union to merge the United States, Canada, and Mexico into a single entity, a single country, with only one border, and that was around all the three countries with no border between the United States and Canada or United States and Mexico. If you think we have a problem now with migration, it would become even worse with no borders at all. And yet these were the recommendations out of this committee of the Council on Foreign Relations, which lists Heidi Cruz as one of those task force members. And it says here, it's got an asterisk by her name, and the asterisk says this: the individual has endorsed the report and submitted an additional or dissenting view. So you go back to the dissenting view of Heidi Cruz, and this is what she says. I support the task force report and its recommendations aimed at building a safer and more prosperous North America. And then she goes on and says that she is just concerned that we maintain the ability of these banks to be able to run the banking regulations and that sort of thing instead of making it a state thing. Well, that's no surprise because at the same time, Heidi Cruz had Morgan connections and then subsequently went on and became part of the Goldman Sachs banking empire. And incidentally, her husband got a very sweetheart deal from Goldman Sachs for his campaign that he just forgot to mention to anybody in his public disclosure. Now, Heidi has been a member of the Council on Foreign Relations for many years. I've got the various years here that she's been a member. She's listed for 5 years in here. And then suddenly, when Cruz starts to get politically active, her membership disappears. She is no longer a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And so here we have a woman who is involved in a New World Order organization, involved in not just that organization, but working with that organization to help bring about a North American Union. And you don't see this in her Wikipedia online. It's never mentioned that she was involved in these things. But it does mention that she worked for Condoleezza Rice and that sort of thing in the Bush administration. Of course, Condoleezza Rice is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a trilateralist. And so these people that want to build a new world order, they sometimes don't like the public to know what they're doing. And so you don't see this sort of thing coming out. And a lot of times, even if it did come out, the average citizen wouldn't understand what's being exposed. Most of you who watch these videos each week understand these things. And yet this sort of information is not getting out there. The thing about it that bothers me as well is that the North American Union and other organizational things like the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Partnership, and that sort of thing, are not really involved with trade. These things are being sold as building better trade relationships. That was how the NAFTA was sold. That's how all of these agreements are sold. Even the North American Union. Oh, don't pay any attention to these crazies saying that this is going to form a new country and we're going to lose our independence. This is only about trade. Just concentrate on that. Don't pay attention to anything else. And that's the mantra that they use for all of these things. And so when a person comes out during a debate and says, for instance, I have never supported the TPP, technically that's true. But I have a letter that was signed by Cruz that says that this, I hope the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership produce agreements that reduce government-created barriers to trade, enabling increased prosperity for all involved. So, we see him say that in the way of this being a trade deal. But underlying it all, and this is the dangerous part, underlying it all is the idea of us losing our independence to a larger international entity. And it creates new boards and so on and so forth. The TPP, for instance, only 5 chapters basically cover trade. It's got 29 chapters or more. And so it builds these new foreign courts and regulatory agencies and that sort of thing. But that is never mentioned. And so he hopes that this sort of thing will lead to better trade. Well, that's not the issue in our mind. It's not trade. We're all for free trade. But not for these agreements that handcuff us and create the condition where we will lose control over our own economy to an entity that is to come with this vote in Congress. So we're very worried about it. So these sorts of things bother me, that we're not supposed to look at the wives of these candidates. And yet the wife of this particular candidate has a history of working with Morgan Bank, with the Goldman Sachs Bank, and not just simply as a clerk or a teller. I'm talking about in management, and been placed on a leave of absence for the campaign. And we'll go right back into the Goldman Sachs if, I'm assuming, he loses the race for president. If she becomes the first lady, I wouldn't expect that she'd go back to these banks. But it has that connection. There's a connection with these New World Order individuals. But let's not look at the wife. There's a connection with the Council on Foreign Relations. There's a connection with the North American Union. But let's not look at these wives. We don't want to look at these wives because they don't want us to understand some of the things that are going on behind the scenes relative to all of this. Now, this information came out amongst many knowledgeable individuals. And he was asked about this publicly. What about your wife being CFR? Well, she's quit the CFR, and they're a den of vipers. Well, it's funny. Since he said that this is a den of vipers, he's filled his foreign policy staff, his advisory staff for the campaign with people from this den of vipers. A lot of them. And I'm not talking about just some underlying individuals within the CFR. I'm talking about leaders within the CFR. So these are questions that need to be answered when we go to the polls. We need to ask our candidates about them before we even go to the polls. We're not getting good answers, ladies and gentlemen. We need those answers. Until next week, I'll see you then. Well, maybe you'll be back.